Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Fekahmed Negash. I work in the Ministry of Water and Energy of Ethiopia as a Director for Basin Administration Directorate. And I look at overview of the allocation challenges at different scales, transboundary, national, and local. Why is transboundary water important for Ethiopia? Actually, Ethiopia is a dome-shaped country with the highland at the center, and then circumscribed by the lowland all around, and then cut from northwest to southwest by the Great Rift Valley. So as you can see, of the 12 basins in the country, except two, except the Awash and the Awash and the Rift Valley lakes, all our rivers are transboundary in nature. That means more than 90% of all resources in terms of water resource, irrigation, hydropower are found on this transboundary rivers. So it is very important issue for Ethiopia. Then I may focus on the transboundary aspect on the Nile. Again, the Nile is strategically very important for Ethiopia. 4 of the 12 basins flow into the Nile, and they contribute actually 86% of the annual flow of the Nile, 86%. So the Nile is, as you know, a very controversial basin actually in the world, with huge population of nearly 300 million, covering about 10% of the African continent landmass. And the issue is that 4 of the 10 countries in the basin are the most poor in the world, and there is huge climatic variability as it crosses from the equator into the Mediterranean. There is also conflict in the 7 of the 10 countries, very limited infrastructure, very variability in terms of economic growth, and the per capita income, GDP per capita income ranges from 200 up to 1,500 within the basin. And the Nile is the longest river in the world, but it is not the largest. It is only 4% of the Amazon, 8% of the Congo, 12% of Yangtze, 20% of the Volta, so on and so forth. So it is not a very big river. And the water, actually, I can say water is scarce, and when water is scarce, it calls actually for a very proper and efficient water allocation. And then for this, there is a challenge of population growth, growing at 3%. There is though many of the country are very poor, they are not performing well economically. Some of them, doing very well within the basin. There is issue of climate change. Then the Nile, I can say, is a water scarce country. Nationally, some countries have a better, water availability per person per year, like the Congo, about 1,600. But when you look at the basin scale, it is barely 300 metric cube per person per year. So when we look at the basin perspective, each country registers the same water within the system, so it is very low actually. Sorry. Also, the other challenge within the basin is the variability actually in space and time. As you can see from this map, the majority of the water comes from the Ethiopian highlands in the equatorial lakes region. And when you go up, when you go downstream, there is barely no contribution. Like the users of the Nile, that is the Sudan and Egypt, contribute actually nothing to the flow. There is also variability in terms of time. This is actually the flow from the Ethiopian highland, Tekeze, and the Blue Nile, which are actually contributing nearly 86% of the flow. The flow actually happens between July and October, only for 3 months. So this also indicates a very big challenge. The other challenge within the basin is the legal and institutional framework. There is no agreement. There is no all-inclusive agreement within the basin, but there are 2 agreements within the basin now. That is the 1929 and the 1959 agreement. 1929 agreement is between the UK on behalf of its colony with Egypt, and the 1959 is between Egypt and Sudan. And this agreement actually allocates the whole water to Egypt and Sudan, and no water to the remaining or to the source countries. So this is one agreement on one side. There is an agreement signed last year in May. That is a cooperative framework agreement between 6 countries and then agreed, actually, and negotiated and agreed between all countries except Eritrea, but signed by 6 countries. Only Egypt, Sudan, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, they didn't sign this agreement. So we have now 2 agreements within one basin. And the 1929 and 59 agreement, though they are unfair, they have also a very special provision in which case, they allow Egypt to construct infrastructure in upstream countries, like they have a dam in Sudan known as Jebel Awliya. So the absence of this, institutional and legal framework led to absence of trust and transparency. Also, there is problem of basin-wide management. There is also issue of policy, incompatibility of policy in the basin, whereby, like, if I focus on Ethiopia, Egypt, and Sudan, where there is a very big issue, the water policy of Ethiopia talks about equitable and reasonable utilization, and the Sudan doesn't have any policy, and the water policy of Egypt talks about prior appropriation and getting additional water from upstream after using 100% of the waters. There is also a wrong policy approach, like considering the water, the transboundary water, as a national security. Also policy of expansion. Now Egypt is expanding actually into the Toshka in a desert. They are growing rice in a desert. There is competition. They also transferred water into Asia to the Sinai. There is also problem of regulation that there is no water chart and there is no even water meter in Egypt. There is a huge development agenda in upstream. All upstream countries want to use the water. This is also another challenge. Like in my country, Ethiopia, we want to, in the coming 4 years, we want to increase water supply and sanitation from 68.4% to 100% coverage, irrigation from 2.5 to 15.5%, and hydropower from 2,000 to 10,000 in the coming 4 years. The other challenge actually is degradation on the Ethiopian highlands. There is huge degradation, which led to actually siltation of structures in downstream. So there is also pollution, particularly in downstream countries, making nearly 20 billion cubic meters of water out of use. There is also wastage actually in terms of water. This graph shows actually the flow into Aswan. You can see the variability, annual variability, but here the pink color is inflow into Aswan and the red is outflow from Aswan. When you compare the two, there is a difference of 25 billion cubic meters of water, which is lost to evaporation, seepage, and spillage. So there is huge loss actually in the system. And this loss can be actually significantly reduced if the storage is constructed into the Ethiopian highlands. When we come to, again, at the national level, Ethiopia is often termed as the water tower of East Africa. But that doesn't mean even this, some policymakers also wrongly take this as Ethiopia being a water-rich country. But Ethiopia, I can say, is a water-scarce country. Okay. The reason I say this is that of the 12 basins we have excess water in 4 basins, on the western part. The remaining 8 basins are water scarce, and even 3 of them doesn't have any flow. I think I have some problem with, sorry for with the linkage. There is also variability, temporal as well as spatial variability. This is the flow of rivers in Ethiopia. They flow between July and October. After that, no flow or barely only base flow, actually requiring a huge infrastructure. Also, this figure shows the spatial variability. The 4 basins I mentioned, the major ones on the western side, contributing 85% of the national water. Here we can find better water availability, but on the eastern side, the remaining basins are actually water scarce. And surprisingly, only 40% of the population live in those areas which are actually having better water. 60% of the population live in the eastern part where there is no water scarcity. Then the transboundary nature is one issue. When you come to the national issue, the transboundary nature is a challenge. Also, Ethiopia is a federal country with a federal government and a regional government, and the regional governments have got also their own priority. So the trans-regional nature of the rivers is also another challenge. There is, again, problem of low infrastructure, and then there is dependence on rainfall. This graph actually shows the relationship between the GDP and the rainfall. When there is good rainfall, the GDP takes off. When the rainfall goes down, then the GDP is actually at the mercy of rainfall. So this also calls for the country to look into a way of regulating actually or having access to dependable water resource. The graph at the bottom, it shows relationship again between GDP, agriculture, industry, and service. All those actually oscillates with the availability of rainfall. Then there is also a problem of low per capita actually storage. This is a 2007 figure, like in Ethiopia per capita storage was actually 43 meter cube per second per year. But now things are changing after the focus on some hydraulic infrastructure. At this time, it is about 192 meter cube per person per year storage capacity. Two big dams are under construction, that is the Gibesiri and the Renaissance Dam. When they are completed, it will again go up to 1,200 per person per year. The other issue again with infrastructure is again the focus on energy. So most of our infrastructures actually focus on energy generation, on hydropower. This is the Gibe 2, which was inaugurated actually last year. There is also incompatibility between the pace of development and the experience, as well as the capacity to manage the resources. We have also extreme event benefit is not very pronounced. We have floods during rainy season. Flood doesn't mean this water is already lost, then intensifying of the issue of water scarcity, and then they are out of actually allocation. We have huge environmental degradation on the Ethiopian island in terms of deforestation, in terms of soil erosion, and intensive grazing. There is also capacity in all its forms. There is probably a challenge of capacity, financial capacity, institutional capacity, as well as technical capacity. When we come to at a local level, there is a very big problem in administration. Water resource administration in Ethiopia is a national issue. It is handled by a federal issue. And the budget is a regional issue. Regions have their own budget, so this incompatibility between administrative boundary and basin boundary is one of the challenges. Then finance, even though finance is a challenge at all levels, it is very critical at a local level, where they don't have big resources to go for big infrastructures. Then absence of institutional mechanism at a local level. The administration goes from the federal to basin level. So at a local level, there is institutional gap to do water allocation. Lack of experience. We don't have a very good experience in water management. We start focusing, on water resource management only for the last half century. So we don't have a long experience in that area. We used to depend on rainfall. There are also challenges, lack of tools and that can facilitate the capacity to allocate, particularly in terms of analytical capacity. That is very pervasive. So then the issue is, does this large infrastructure inclusive? So this is the issue. So a lot of infrastructure under construction are now very large. So this is actually a new, the site of a new dam recently started in Ethiopia on the Blue Nile, known as the Renaissance Dam, with a storage capacity of about 64 billion meter cube. That is on the Blue Nile, and that will generate actually 5,250 megawatts. So this is all I have. And finally, at the conclusion, sustainable and all-inclusive water allocation between uses and the users is key, actually in face of water scarcity. Legal and institutional arrangement for system-wide management of water allocation is not a choice, it is a mandate, particularly on transboundary rivers. Large hydraulic infrastructures properly planned and operated can reduce variability, vulnerability, as well as scarcity. Public-private partnership can improve efficiency, as well as availability of finance. Small-scale schemes, including water harvesting, are important for fair allocation, as large structures focusing on energy alone may not fairly allocate the water across the board. And participatory watershed management on the highlands can change the challenge we are facing into opportunity. Capacity building and the practical experience sharing can enhance the process of efficient water allocation. Thank you.